Now we're jumping into the TSP. These are your investment options within the TSP. Of course, you have your 5 base funds, which are the G fund, F fund, CS, and I funds. Relatively low fees are why this plan can be really good while you're working and why you might want to invest in the TSP. There is a mutual fund window, though with about 5,000 different investment options. It is a self-managed program, and with this program there are additional fees depending on what that looks like. So just be mindful of that. Also, these in order to contribute to the mutual fund window, you do have a pass-through, which means your investments will go to your base funds, the GF, CS, and I funds, and then you can transfer into the mutual fund window. Of course, there's a minimum amount that you need to start in the mutual fund window, and there is a maximum. So you cannot contribute more than 0.25% of your TSP balance into the mutual fund window. There are Lifecycle funds, which are just a diversification of the CF or GF, CS, and I funds. And of course, that diversified mix can vary depending on which fund mix you decide to go in. There are about, I think 10 to 15 different options within the L fund, and you can go on what that target looks like for you at retirement, and then every quarter those funds will adjust with the target allocations for what that is supposed to be based on that given retirement timeline. For instance, this last year, or the end of 2025, the L 2025 turned into the L income fund, and now we have the L 2030. And so that's kind of how that works. So we have to make sure, and obviously those with the investments, you can see here from these different pieces is that you're more in the riskier funds while you're further out from retirement, and then it's more in the G fund or the quote unquote safer fund when you get closer to that retirement age. So be mindful of that. Of course, all CSRS and FERS employees can participate in the TSP. FERS employees can get up to a 5% match. For 2026, we do have a maximum amount of contribution for any employee. Depending on your age will depend on what that maximum contribution will look like. And of course, with that though, there is a maximum contribution you want to contribute per pay period. Because if you front load your contributions in the beginning of your retirement, or the beginning of your employment rather, then you'll miss out on some of that matching money if you're a FERS employee. So very, very key to make sure the amount that you're contributing per pay period is not too much and also not too little, because we want to capitalize on that savings or on the matching money and get that money from the government, right? That's going to increase that retirement income for you later on down the road. For you high income earners, it's very key to make sure that if your income was over that $150,000 in 2025, that just know that your catch-up contributions, if you're contributing more than the $24,500, that's all going to go into Roth. And so we've got to be very mindful of that. They'll automatically be distributed into the Roth account. So just be mindful of that. So if you don't have a Roth account and then one opens for you, that might be why. Also, TSP does now have a Roth conversion option. However, the TSP funds cannot be used to pay the taxes for the money that you're converting from traditional to Roth. So it's very, very key that you talk to United Benefits representative, and let's make sure that, for one, Roth conversion is even in what you should be doing, and two, how do you do it systematically where you don't bump yourself into another tax bracket, and also where is that money coming from? Making sure that you have that nest egg to cover the taxes that you're going to have to pay at the end of the year. So very key to make sure that we're understanding how that works for you before you do that within the TSP. Also, there's subject annual contribution limits, like we were saying, for the TSP. So you don't want to contribute too early. You do have 2 loan options available. You've got the general loan, which can be used for any purpose. There is a minimum and maximum amount for that. Must be repaid within 1 to 5 years. And then you have a residential loan, which must be used to purchase or construct a primary residence. And you've got a minimum and maximum there. And again, must be paid within a certain time frame, but it's a little bit more. It's 1 to 15 years because generally those are more than your general loans. Typically, you also have 2 withdrawal options while you're employed with the federal government. Those are financial hardship withdrawals, and then of course your age-based in-service withdrawals. And then of course you have only 4 withdrawals per year that you can make with the age-based in-service. And let's just be mindful of your required minimum distributions that are not required while you're working. So anybody who has met that RMD age, you do not have to take RMDs from your TSP while you are still working. Of course, in retirement, that changes, right? So you'll no longer be able to contribute after you separate from the government. You no longer have loan options available. You can still pay off your loans, depending on what that looks like for you, but we can talk about that on whether or not it's worth it for you, because that's a whole nother conversation. But you can make up to 2 transfers per month, and after all of those moves are done, you have to move everything into the G fund, and that includes mutual fund and window trades. Now, this also is true for employees as well, by the way, so just be mindful of that. You can take your money out via a withdrawal, so you can take a distribution of a withdrawal or a transfer, or you can roll over or annuitize your TSP. Which option is best for you is a completely different scenario. We really want to talk to you individually about that, because there's different things that you may not think about when you're looking at all of these different options. So you can take either a full, partial, or a combination of either of those options. You may have to pay taxes on withdrawals, or eventually pay taxes on withdrawals, depending on what that looks like. And you may be subject to another early withdrawal penalty, of course, based on your age and all of those different factors. Like I said, LWAP or leave without pay, non-pay status. I don't know why that's in there. Maybe credible for 6 months. I'll have to take that out. Anyways, to withdraw in retirement with the TSP, then you can have scheduled installments, monthly, quarterly, annually. They can be based on a dollar amount, or they can be based on your expected life expectancy. They can be there. You can also receive unscheduled installments. They don't like to have more than 1 transaction within a 30-day period. You may choose, again, traditional or Roth. So you can say, okay, I want to pay taxes this time and just pull from my traditional side of my TSP, or I can just pull from my Roth TSP. What you cannot do is you can't choose, I want to pull money from the G fund or I want to pull money from the C fund. All that money will come to you proportionally based on the funds that you're in. So if you're 50% in the G fund, 50% in the C fund, you're going to receive that $10,000, $5,000 from the G fund and $5,000 from the C fund will come out. So be mindful of that. Of course, you're not taxed immediately on transfers or rollovers, depending on your age of separation, and there may be also an additional penalty, but again, we want to coordinate that with you, make sure you understand what that looks like. So TSP does offer an annuity. Is it worth it for you or not? That's the big question. When you choose to annuitize within the federal government, just know that you give up control of your money, and I don't think anybody saves up all of their entire career to give up control to the government of their money. But that's what happens when you enter into the TSP annuity. In fact, the government will take your money and enter it into a contract with MetLife. That is the administrator of the TSP annuity. And again, so you lose control and ownership of your money after that. Of course, you can choose what option. There's about 16 different options to choose from on what that looks like. But just know that depending on what option you choose, it could that money could be lost depending on what that looks like for your spouse and you. So definitely want to consider those different options. And then also there can be, you can't stop, start, or change any of those payments out of the TSP annuity, which is very different with the newer annuities that are recent or currently available for you. So if you're looking at annuitizing, I would highly recommend making sure that you're looking elsewhere and doing your due diligence to make sure you choose the best option for you before you make that change, because once you receive that first distribution, you cannot stop, start, or change anything again. And there's no living benefits after you annuitize with the TSP. So what happens if you die? If you have a spouse named, then your spouse, or the TSP rather, will open a spouse beneficiary account. Then your spouse can then transfer or roll over the money into another account, or they can keep the money in the beneficiary account. And then your spouse dies, but they can then have whoever's named as a beneficiary receive their money. However, if there is someone other than a spouse named, then the money is forced out and with a full check within 90 days if nothing happens. So we have to make sure that if you don't have a spouse named as a beneficiary, or if you and your spouse pass away and you have your contingent who is not a spouse named as a beneficiary, they understand the rules here, okay? Because a non-spouse beneficiary account will be opened again for 90 days, and then it's either forced out or you have to move the money into an inherited IRA, which that can present challenges that I'm not qualified to talk about. You will need to talk to a United Benefits representative to understand how that works. So again, ask yourself certain questions about the TSP. Why are you contributing to the TSP? Is the amount that you are contributing the right amount that you should be contributing or not? Who will receive your TSP funds in the event that you pass away? I cannot tell you how many TSP statements we see on a daily basis where there is no beneficiary named, or the beneficiary named may be wrong. So just make sure that we're looking at that, or that you're checking that as well. Now you can go on to tsp.gov and make sure that that information is in there. And you want to do that, especially if you haven't opened your TSP account since the rollout happened in 2022, because not all of that information transferred over. Also, we want to make sure it's current, right? But I highly recommend naming a beneficiary for any of your benefits, especially the TSP, because it avoids that probate process and shortens the delay for your family to get the funds that they need to be able to take care of your assets or your estate.